I want to ask you about your 2021 book on Bon Scott first, and that's titled Bad Boy Boogie, The True Story of AC/DC Legend Bon Scott. You said in an interview with Australia's The Leader at the time you were promoting this book that Bon should be remembered for what he did while he was alive, not how he died. And you also said that he was the last of the great larrikins. He was in the last generation of larrikins who could get away with being larrikins. Am I pronouncing it larrikins right?
Yeah.
Larrikins.
Do you need an explanation? A larrikin is. I'm trying to think of an American equivalent
Jokester?
to. Yeah, yeah, but it's sort of in Australia. It was until, I guess, until political correctness and wokeness became a big factor. It was prized. People like Paul Hogan is the definitive larrikin. He's a guy who could get away with certain things with a bit of a wink and a smile. And deep down inside, no, if anybody's going to be hurt, it's himself, not anybody else. A guy who would look at life for as an adventure. You know,
Right, right.
and not take himself too seriously. It's really important part of Australian culture not to take yourself too seriously. Mark Evans, for AC/DC historians, would know that Mark was the guy, again, to me, was in the classic lineup, with Bon Scott out front, right up to the time just before Highway to Hell. But he was there for, Let There Be Rock and High Voltage and Long Way to the Top.
Power
Mark was on
Age?
the.
Is he on
Yeah,
Power Age?
Power Age.
Yeah.
Fantastic record, So
Considered
Mark
the
was there.
best by many AC/DC fans.
And I would agree with that. So Mark was there for this. Really, it wasn't like he was there for a couple of years. He was there for a long time. Played lots and lots of shows. I got to be his ghostwriter, and through him, I just got so many great AC/DC stories.
I can imagine.
But the best. There's two that really stick in my mind. There's one where Mark and Bon are sharing a room, and they're in Paris. This is about 1978, so they're starting to really take off internationally, and they've had a big night out with not just a big gig, but they've met a couple of very friendly locals. Okay, I'm going to put it that way. And they've been on the road for 6 months now or whatever, and they're that I've spent time on the road with bands, and it's like a vacuum, it's like a cocoon. That Spinal Tap joke about hello Cleveland.
Yeah.
Well, I get that. I can see how people after a while have no idea where they are. So they get up the next morning, and they played a great gig, and they met these lovely, very friendly locals, and they get up and they're on one of those little balconies in a Parisian hotel room, and they're looking out, and there's the Eiffel Tower is just there. And Mark's sitting there with this great grin on his face, thinking this is fantastic, because Mark comes from the same kind of background as Keith Urban did, very working class. And Bond's looking out for ages. And Mark said, "What's up, mate?" And he said, "It's really funny, Mark. That tower, they've got one of those in Paris as well." He just had no idea where he was. And the one's a little bit more blue, shall we say?
Yeah.
Hopefully, there's no. This is not a G-rated show.
No, it's not a G-rated show.
Okay, so in Australia, particularly in the 70s, you would have a tour program that they still do it now, but back then it used to be a really big marketing tool, and band members would get one of those standard Q&As. What's your favorite drink? What's your favorite movie? What color do you like? And one of the questions on the questionnaire was, what's your personal goal, or who would you like to meet? And this was Mark's first tour with the band. And when it was published and printed, his quote was, "I'd like to fuck Britt Eklund." And no one even looked at it twice. And they published it and printed it. And, AC/DC's audience back then, because there was a show here called Countdown, and it's like Top of the Pops in the UK, right? It's a pop show. AC/DC were on almost every week and got this big teenage audience. So some kid from the show has gone home with a program and shown it to mum and dad, who have completely freaked out, rang their local counsellor, all these gigs were cancelled. And of course, Mark didn't fill out the questionnaire at all. Bond filled it out for him. And so they're sitting on the tour bus, and all these gigs are being cancelled, and there's all this furor, and journalists are chasing them for quotes. And Mark's sitting there, and he's devastated. He's like, "Oh man, what's happened to me? I'm going to get kicked out of the band. This is terrible." And he's sitting on the bus feeling absolutely distraught. And Bond sat down next to him, and Mark's thinking, "Oh, okay, he's going to come clean. It's all going to be fine." Because Bond was slightly older than the other guys too. So he was sort of seen as the senior member of the band. Bond sat down with him and looked at him and said, "It's a tough time, Mark. But the girl does have feelings too, and then walked away. He just couldn't own it. He just couldn't do it.
Oh man.
But, you know, that goes back to that whole kind of larrikin thing that I was telling you about.
There's a prankster.
It's a prankster. Some people can get away with it and some people can't. And Bond could.